Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly show about the current state of Ultimate. I am host Keith Rayner, and I'm joined today by editor extraordinaire and friend of the show, frequent helper host, Edward Stevens, who's taking the place of Charlie Eisner. Unfortunately, Charlie having to step away for a sick day. I'm also not in my usual location. My power went out about a half hour before the show. Mysteriously, don't know why. So we are going through our trials and tribulations, but we are here for Deep Look, and we have a big show for you coming up. Edward, how have you been? Welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Always glad to be here. Glad I could make it work. A little behind the scenes intel. It was kind of a last minute sub in, and I was not the last minute change that we had to make. Keith, I understand that your power went out at home like 30 minutes before like 30 minutes before now.
Indeed. And, you always got to be ready to have your number called. You never know when someone's going to need to step off the field and you'll have to sub in. And I'm glad Edward was a ready and willing super sub for us today. And we're going to be talking about Northwest Challenge. So Edward's going to get a chance to see if he can muck up Charlie's picks later in the episode as we get ready to preview the women's division of Northwest Challenge. But prior to that, we're actually going to be joined by World Games coach Matty Tsang. So excited to have him on. He's one of the best interviews in all of Ultimate. So excited to have a conversation with Matty to break down everything going on with the World Games. We just saw the roster come out last week after our show. So we haven't had a chance to chat about that. So Edward and I will also be giving our impressions from the Newsy roster. But welcome in Matty Tsang, now four-time coach of the World Games team. Matty, great to have you back on the show. I think we have not sure if the audience was able to hear Matty here. There we go. Matty, welcome to the show. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, nice to see both of you. Hopefully we can make it through all the technical problems.
Hey, it's all about being adaptable in the game of of Ultimate, and certainly the team has a bunch of challenges. But you've got this fantastic new roster that came out this past year, and really had our entire Discord just like a buzz. People speculating about who made the team or who should or shouldn't or what roles people are going to play. So we're glad to have you here to set the record straight as we did last time. So we can dive right in. We have questions from some of the folks in our subscriber group, as well as Edward and I. I'm excited to get your thoughts on the team. But just initially, is it like a sigh of relief to have the roster out? Does it feel like you're really starting something? Or for you, is this just like the middle of the process and this is just par for the course?
There is some relief. There's so much sort of preparation going up to this point. Like, I think that me and Miranda and Carlos and Nancy, the other coaches, we probably met, I think, 14 times outside of the actual tryout. So there's a lot of work that goes into getting to this point. And then honestly, once a roster drops, for me, it's lots of check-ins with folks who are cut. And so there's not a lot of joy. There's more just kind of like absorbing a lot of the emotional feelings. And yeah, I until yesterday, I probably was doing check-ins every single day. So for me, the experience is a little bit different, but yeah, I'm excited to look forward and start building with the current group that we have.
Well, before we get into
here on the screen. Go ahead, Edward.
Any further questions? Yeah, let's take a look at the roster just in case you missed the drop last week. We had a special emergency World Games reactions podcast all about it. But if you missed it, here's the Team USA 2025 World Games team. Your starters are Marquez Brownlee, Chris Kocher, Claire Chastain, Grant Lindsley, Dawn Colton, Anna Thompson, Carolyn Finney. You get Claire Trope, Dylan Freechild, Cami Groom, Rafi Hayes, Kayla Helton, Henry Ing, Michael Ing, and then there's a list of alternates, 3 each on the male matching and female matching side. We've got Christian Boxley, Brett Halsmeyer, Kirsten Johnson, Johnny Maltz, Lindsay McKenna, and Olivia Player. I tend to call Olivia Player Liv Player. not sure what she wants to go by, Olivia or Liv. But yeah, that's the group. The main 14 is going to be the roster that we'll see in Chengdu at the World Games, and also at a warm-up tournament at London Invite this June. We will see the alternates play with the team. So that's what we're working with. I know we've got a lot of questions fired up, and I'll let interviewer extraordinaire Keith kick it off.
Well, I actually, in preparation for this interview, Matty, I listened to our conversation that we had the last time the World Games team. You were sitting in this seat, and we had a great conversation about it last time. And one of the things that I came away with was that you talked about looking at players not so much just as their individual talent. That you learned over the years that it isn't really about so much that there's going to be a talented team. Basically, whatever you do, it's really about what combinations work the best together, and looking at what combination stood out at tryout. And last time you said you kind of had some build arounds each cycle. You'd have a few players who, when you put them all together, they seem to kind of like really lock in and make the team the best that it could be. And then from there, you were kind of filling out the roster around building around those players. Who stood out and what combination stood out that made it feel like, okay, this is the center of starting this roster in this year's cycle?
Sure. Yeah, so it's interesting. I think there's combinations, and then there's also this concept of folks who can slot in with multiple different players, right? Like, I think one of the things, in the big conversation about who should make the team is like, we look at these folks who are number ones on their team and they're featured players, and then we just assume that they're going to be great and they can do that. But when you take a bunch of number ones together and put them on the same field, like, what I always say to them is there's someone else on your team who's making space and letting you be featured. And so while there's combinations, there's also, these are number ones that can slot in with a lot of folks, can countercut, can make space for other people and still not lose, what they're good at. But some combinations, and I think we saw this at the last cycle of World Games, like Dylan and Finney worked really well together. And, I think we saw that. But there were even combinations of folks that we didn't take, like Johnny Malks and KJ, Kirsten Johnson, played extremely well together. They had a lot of reps together, but on Sunday, where it was really windy, it was very cool to see them just kind of like going upwind and hitting really nice spaces. But I look at this roster and there's a lot of folks here who, aside from the combinations, just are able to slot in a lot of different ways and adjust to who's on the field with them. And that awareness is so important to give us the flexibility as we go forward.
Matty, one thing I noticed, because I got to attend in Sarasota a year ago, the tryouts, at least one of the two tryouts, the East Coast tryouts for the WUC Team USA teams. And you were there in sort of an advisory and also kind of a scouting capacity, kind of preparing for this intense World Games tryout this year. And I wonder, what sorts of things did the WUC coaching staff emphasize that you emphasize differently or less when you were looking at a World Games team versus structuring a World Ultimate Championships team, which of course, you have single gender divisions and you have bigger rosters. So I wonder how that changes the calculus for you.
I don't know if there's differences. I think for me, it was mainly, I sat on the mixed field for the whole time. And, again, this is another thing that people, when they're trying to pick this roster, they're like, well, this is a number one. They're so great on their club team. The other thing is we have a lot of folks who don't play in the mixed division. So for me, a lot of it was just watching how people played on the mixed field and how quickly they picked it up, right? So there is this other thing, is that like the skill set to be on one of these teams is how quickly you can incorporate with a different style of play. So it might be mixed, but it's also like, all the teams run different types of skill sets, right? Like dump sets. Like it's constant at these trials, like, oh, are we going to be positive? Are we going to be level? Are we going to be 45 back? And there's always these differences of opinion. So for me, it was like watching people's success and like learning curve on the mixed field. It was getting to know some of the players that I don't get to see play live a lot. And, it's interesting. This process was completely different from the last cycle where we were coming out of COVID. I hadn't seen people play the last club season. I didn't know any of our competition because we had missed a cycle. And so, yeah, for me, it was like just watching players, getting to know them, kind of seeing what their tendencies were, and then seeing how well they adapted in a national team concept, which was learning really quickly with people who don't play similarly to you.
One of the biggest questions I think that a lot of outside viewers have of this team is what level of factor there is for your previous experience and previous knowledge of players. Like obviously, a number of these players you've coached with, whether it is in a national team setting or in a club setting, a lot of them you've seen tape from, you've scouted, you've had a chance to coach against them. So you have this already set concept of who some of these players and what their skills are. Then they also come to tryouts and perform at whatever level they do across the 2 or 4 days of tryouts, depending on how that works out. How much of a factor is your previous understanding of players versus the weighting of how they perform at tryouts and how they work together with the group itself?
Yeah, I would say just in general for me specifically, I place a high value on the tryout. Obviously, body of work comes into it, and we had to have some of that this year, especially on actually on both sides, but a lot on the WMP side because we had folks who are injured. But yeah, like for me, the starting point, I think, is who has the best tryout. And that's actually the person I start with and not a body of work or a role that we need to fill. So someone like, Michael Ng came out and had 4 great days of tryouts, and he definitely was a starting point. And I think his peers saw how well he was playing. And so, that might not be how somebody else would start the roster, but for me, it's always who plays well enough to deserve a spot here. And then we move from there. And then, like there are people who have great tryouts and have a great body of work who did not make this team. Right. And so I think that's the other thing is that is the unfortunate or difficult thing about this roster is that you can do everything right and not make a team like this. And, I've been talking with some of those folks, right? Like someone like Jack Hatchett is a phenomenal player, would be a huge asset to this team. And for various reasons on how these starting points have and how it shakes out, like he's not on this roster, but that does not mean, right, he didn't have a great tryout. He didn't have a great weekend, right? He had an amazing walk cycle. And so, that's one of the really hard things about this team. And, criticism is legitimate about these teams because you could swap out a couple more players and have an excellent team with all the criteria we're looking for.
Matty, there are a number of first-year World Games players on this team. You get Marcus Brownlee and Anna Thompson. Cam Groom has made it, which I know the Ulti-World pundits have been clamoring for years. But I want to look at the 2 youngest players to make the team. Don Colton and Henry Ng were both just less than a year ago finishing up their college careers in USAU college play. And I wonder what those 2 in particular showed you as young players that made you think, yes, I want these 2 on my team.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, young players extremely talented, but I think more so like getting to watch them both through the walk cycle and obviously getting to coach against Don. I think, first of all, Henry, I think is almost a 1 of 1, right? Can guard 1 through 7, has a really good mixed experience, like great cross-gender throws. Watching him in the club season, right? Like, he plays D against so many different types of players. So I think he is a really unique talent, and seeing him on the WUC mix field really highlighted that. So getting to see it live with many reps was phenomenal. And yeah, like he's definitely someone who, as a centerpiece, I think you can build around. Dawn, like I've really, obviously so successful, but what I've appreciated is how her defense has progressed from a college type of defense where she was a big block getter and going through these cycles on becoming more of a lockdown defender, being able to take the unders and force out. And then the other really impressive thing for Dawn is like how much her throwing game has progressed in the last couple of years. So again, like talented young players, but ones that have really progressed in the last couple of years that, place them even at their young age on a roster like this.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier that there were one the second day the tryout was really windy and that probably impacted your ability to evaluate players in the same fashion, but also that there were some injuries that players struggled with coming into tryouts, during tryouts. Uh, how did that factor into your decision making process? Especially, last cycle you went to the tournament, you had some injuries at the tournament. I'm sure that created some challenges in how your rotation was run. It's you only get 14 at the event, so every roster spot is precious. How do you consider a player's health and their injury history and where they project to be for the tournament when you're making your roster decisions?
Yeah, I don't know if like the consideration was like, hey, person is like injured and now we're worried about the durability at the tournament. I think it was more like this person's injured, like what is our sort of fairness and integrity in this tryout process? Because for me, like the tryout process is high. And at the same time, like there is a balance of like, well, this person's body of work, or if we project that they're going to be healthy in 4 weeks, do we really want to like miss out on the opportunity to have them on the team? So that definitely was in the conversation. And for some people, we made that decision that, hey, they're going to be in the pool and we're going to put them on the team. And for some folks, like they didn't. And it's unfortunate. Like someone like Mex, uh, for health and really personal reasons, like didn't try out well, but had a great WUC cycle, was instrumental to them having success, and someone that like unfortunately missed out on this and would have been a great add. So for us, the durability didn't project out to the tournament. Like every single cycle, we've had people out for various reasons, right? My first cycle, like Alex Snyder had a migraine, and on that same day, Ashlyn Joy got food poisoning. And so we missed out both of them. And that had nothing to do with durability. It's just like stuff happens, right? And so, yeah, every single cycle that happens, and that's part of, how we build these rosters, is there has to be enough flexibility where you go down to 12 people. I mean, imagine going into like we played Japan without Alex Snyder and Ashlyn Joy. It was like, that's not an ideal thing. And so, yeah, like we have to be prepared for that, for sure.
One of the things that people are really kind of excited and buzzy about is the fact that this team is going to go to London Invite, get a chance to prep against several other World Games rosters, maybe potentially another high level roster with a lot of players from other countries around the world, with a super team. We'll see how that shakes out. But what are some of your goals, the team's goals for that tournament? And kind of a second part of this question, since the alternates will be playing there, how do you expect to mix them in with the 14 set for Chengdu?
Yeah, so I mean, I think our goal is like this is a great way to prepare, right? Obviously, playing against the competition before we actually see them at World Games, which that's part of what makes the World Games hard is that like you basically have one chance, and if you lose a game, likely your fate is not in your own hands. You're gonna have to depend. You have to win out and depend on someone else losing. So that takes some of that pressure away. We can test some of our systems and seeing what our matchups are. So that's definitely great. And then, yeah, obviously getting to play super team, and Steph is trying to put this great team together. So I think that there's a reality that some of the top talent in Europe aren't on World Games teams. So, and then I'm assuming that we'll work together and get some snubs in there who are highly motivated to beat us. In terms of like the alternates, the goal here is right. Like we're developing with the 20, right? Part of it is practical, is that somebody may need to replace someone, and so we want to make sure that all our bases are covered. I also think, like for me, the way I don't consider like the reps that the alternate should be taking different reps. So even though like going in a competition, we may be thinking like, hey, this is your likely matchup. I would like to see the alternates also match up, because we can learn from that. Like if we have an alternate who is really successful against one of the folks who are going to be in China, even if they're not playing, we can learn from that and we can try to replicate that in the folks who are traveling. So for me, as much as possible, we're trying to develop through all 20. And honestly, the gap between, like, the difference between an alternate and someone on the team isn't right. Like we could take those people and flip flop them. So um, people are always like, oh, somebody might outplay someone. I was like, yeah, this whole team on a given day, someone's going to outplay someone, and that's part of what's going to make us great, right? That's not trying to like, hey, there's a clear hierarchy here. Is like we all need to show up trying to outplay each other in every moment, and that's how we're going to build and get better.
All right, I'm going to give you a chance to light up the bulletin board here with a question coming in from our subscribers. This one actually comes in from Ravi. Who do you see as the biggest threat to the U.S.'s contention for gold?
Well, obviously, super team. Like, luckily, they're not going to World Games.
You heard it here. He's afraid of super team.
Yeah, that's right. I'm so glad that everyone. I know that's not. I mean, that's the thing that's really cool about this tournament, is that the margins are so thin. And so, yeah, I mean, it truly is everyone. It's like, the Aussies' skill and athleticism and their ability to switch gender agnostic and run zones and transition out of them, where they do it very slowly. They're fine with this sort of mixed gender thing, is really impressive. Like Germany obviously killed us with their offensive system. We couldn't bring pressure to them. France, right? They brought a WUC mixed team. Like the majority of their team has played mixed together, right? There's going to be a couple of folks coming from the single gender divisions, but they brought a WUC mixed team that is going to look similar to their World Games team. So their chemistry is going to be super interesting, right? The style of Colombia, right, and Japan. So for me, it's everyone, and going in with the humbleness that no easy games, and we're going to be fully prepared. So not any bulletin material except for super team, but yeah, we're preparing for everyone for sure.
Matty, you've talked a lot about the way players performed, their versatility, their ability to work with each other and learn quickly. But we have another question from our subscribers about how much you weigh that sort of definite on-field stuff versus how much you weigh cultural impact, whether that's positivity, leadership, strategic mindset, any of those slightly more removed from the field factors when you are putting together a roster.
Yeah, I think, again, those are all important and stuff that we do think about. I think in terms of hierarchy, right, we definitely start out with the tryout and what we see at the tryout, and then there's body of work, and then there's looking at, okay, this is our pool of people. Who are the folks that are going to be the connectors on and off the field, who bring some of that stuff that you don't necessarily directly see in a drill or in a scrimmage, but we observe on the sidelines and huddles. This year, for the first time, we did a survey, a post survey after the second tryout to the players to get some of that information of a teammate that provides a lot of support. So, and that was done to sort of complete these pictures, right? We don't, as coaches, we have a certain picture, but we don't have the complete picture. I don't know what it feels like to get looked off on the field. I might not notice that, but as a player, I was like, oh, that person consistently was looking me off, or I don't see who's checking in during warm-ups with me. And so those things are also, it's very apparent going through these cycles that when you have those type of players and that chemistry off the field, it really obviously unlocks on field, but also just the overall player experience, right? This can be a very special experience when you have that aspect as well.
My big takeaway from that is that Matty has never been looked off in his career. Incredible achievement.
I also have never been looked off, but it's because I've never gotten open. So, there's no point in looking my direction. I'm actually curious about something because this question came in from Tanner. And he asked if you could give a young player like a college freshman a roadmap towards making a World Games team. What would you describe as the path to trying to reach the level that these players have reached?
I mean, it's funny because it's a hard thing in general because I think the way people optimize for their teams doesn't necessarily lend itself to a World Games context. So you got to play O and D. You got to have an expansive D skill set. If you're big, can you guard small? If you're small, can you guard big? And then you got to be able to have enough awareness how to play as a number 3 or number 4. And for me, that's why I wish we had, like I'm still pushing and thinking about like, how can we have a national team program, right? Like Ben Yacht, I always use him as an example, like on his team is optimized to catch goals and that makes sense. But on a World Game team, it's like, I want Yacht to get reps playing against handlers, right? Like I want something like that. And so my advice to a young player is if it's not happening on a team, like you got to develop that outside of it. And, there's some folks who, someone like Ben Dameron had an amazing tryout, right? He's not on this list, but like he's definitely in that conversation. And I think he has some of those skills and he's learning a lot of those skills. And the future is super bright with folks like him for this. But yeah, I think for young players, if it's not happening on your team, like you got to figure out how you're going to, do that work elsewhere.
I have a question that sort of builds on that. It's in the neighborhood, and this is kind of a drum I've been beating in our Discord just because I'd have been so excited to see it. And you had a tryout for Chloe Hakimi, made the first tryout list and didn't make the invite tryout. Somebody I personally would have loved to see get a tryout is Tobias Brooks. They're both very young players. And my question is this: it doesn't have to be about those two specifically, but is there a world in which the Team USA, with as many great experienced players as there are, could ever see themselves taking somebody aged 20 or younger? Or are those extra 2-3 years of high level reps truly necessary before they're ready?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think just sort of big picture, like we don't plan for the future on these rosters. You got to just play for the tournament in front of you because there's no guarantees, right? Like somebody like Jack Williams, like we could be building around Jack, but he might not play Ultimate anymore, right? Like you never know what's going to happen in 4 years. So I would support like those type of players being at tryouts or having more opportunities to play at that high level, right? But yeah, like you have to plan for the current cycle. And I mean, Chloe is amazing, like unshakable, playing against all these folks and super impressive. But yeah, there's more development for, great talented players, not just skill wise, right? But also like how you conduct yourself in a really high pressure situation with folks you don't know super well. So there's a lot of other things that go into it. And I support reps for those young players and getting those touches, right? Like getting that experience. But putting folks into that too early, I think can also be damaging for their development. And so, having coached a lot of young players, there's steps. There's no shortcuts to getting to, some of these people that we're looking at now on these teams who've been at it for a long time. Like Kayla has been at it for a long time, like, to get to that level and still perform really high at this level. So.
All right, last question for you, Matty. And this one comes in from Sam. Why do you hate O lines and D lines?
So there's a personal ideology that I just like to see players be able to play both. Like, you could, and so there's that first thing. And then I think it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy in our division that, when we get folks to this national team level, and I'm expecting it doesn't really matter whether receive a pull or pull, and suddenly you're in this mindset, like, Yeah, so for me, it's probably some personal ideology, but I do think it hampers overall growth. And it happens at such a young level where people are optimizing at the youth level, that I see. I coach middle schoolers and I see the high schoolers, and there's like defensive handlers. And I was like, what does that even mean? So I think overall it is actually making us less good at ultimate. So that's why I hate it. I hate bad ultimate. But I also understand, like that's my thing, and like people are optimizing to win this next game. But I would encourage folks to um, think how much, right? Like at a World Games, like I've talked to World Games players, and I was like, okay, you're on D line. How many times do you receive a pull? They're like, never. Or like 70% of times we're starting on D before you O. And then you go and it's like, oh, our D line can't score. Or like our O line can't get it back. And for me, like those type of things like infuriate me. I was like, if the disc is in your hands, try to get it in your hands. If the disc is in your hands, keep it in your hands, right? Like it's not, for me, we've made it overly like difficult in terms of like how we look at it. And then I understand like the drawback of my system is we don't optimize for all, like on Fury, we haven't optimized for all our players. And that's the thing that I need to figure out how to do better. So that's why there's their hate of O&D lines.
Well, we love having you come on the show, Matty, and thank you so much for joining us and providing some clarity into this process. I know a lot of our fans are curious about it. Now that we've got the roster, we're just going to be excited to see what the team can bring to what you noted is going to be a really strong field at the World Games. And prior to that, we'll get to see a little preview at London Invite. So thanks for coming on the show. We'll be glad to watch y'all and support y'all from here.
Thank you all for having me, and I can't wait to hear the criticisms from you on our roster.
Yeah, stay around. You could get in the YouTube chat, Matty. Feel free to. You can sign up as a different name and just troll away. Do what you got to do.
Sure.
Thanks, Matty.
On the internet, no one knows you coach Team USA.
Perfect. Thank you all.
All right, so Edward, now we finally get a chance to provide our own reactions to these rosters. I didn't have a chance to ask Matty why he just cribbed off of my list since I nailed all 7 on the women matching side of the roster. Don't ask me about the male matching side of the roster, but I'm curious to get your reactions. I want to go through our biggest surprises from the World Games roster. What is to you the biggest surprise that stood out the most?
I have to say, my biggest surprise, and this is not a knock on his game, which Matty highlighted, but my biggest surprise was seeing Henry Ing make the list. We had heard that he suffered an injury during the closed tryout on day 1. I didn't know the severity of it, but I did get the impression that he didn't get to play the rest of the time for the second tryout. And I've heard Matty talk about in the past how much emphasis he places on the tryout process. So despite, yes, he can guard 1 through 7, he is one of the best throwers in the world. He's got built-in chemistry with Anna Thompson, who we see on the team, his brother Michael, and the Rhino guys. All of that is in his favor. But I could not believe that somebody who was out there fighting the wind conditions on Sunday, somebody like, Christian Boxley, Brett Halsmeyer, Johnny Mawks, Jack Hatchett, I sort of couldn't believe that somebody who was actually doing that work and had to like fight through that didn't get a spot over him. Credit to Henry, I'm super excited to see him play. But in terms of like what raised my eyebrow first, that was it.
What a strange place we've landed in, because I think prior to this process, he was like, going in was one of the top 10 male matching player considerations. Like one of the players you felt the most confident in about their chances of making the team. So to me, despite the injury, I think knowing all that and knowing that he provides so much of the things that Matty's looking for, I can't say that I have him making the roster as a huge surprise to me, despite the injury. I think for me, it's really tough to pick what is the biggest surprise. I think for me, it's probably that I have three, and they're all on the male magic side. I guess because I felt like I had a handle on the women magic side. Uh, I think it's Christian Boxley not making the 14. Maybe that's a silly one to pick because being the margin between being in and out of the 14 and into the 20 is just so razor thin. It maybe basically doesn't exist. Could be almost contingent on who else is on the team, as in like, oh, did the two people that Christian Boxley plays really well with, I'm envisioning it's not literally everybody plays well in triangles, but if you're looking at the team and kind of like little slices of which groups play well together, did those people make the team? And so that could have been the difference rather than it's just Christian Boxley heads up against Grant Lindsley or Chris Kotcher or Marquez Brownlee or whatnot. But based on the way he played at tryouts, based on how the team seemed like it was shaping up, what the pool looked like, maybe moving away from having a core center handler role, just somebody who fits well with so many different contexts, a player who's kind of in the peak of their career right now is really at the zenith. I was pretty surprised based on my impressions from tryouts, my conversations with people, and from what I took away, that Boxley ended up on the outside looking at the top 14. But really, that's just about even with my other top surprises.
Yeah, well, I want to build on that. And this isn't maybe, okay, here's how I want to change our conversation, just tweak it a little now that we've gotten past like surprises. People always, lob the criticism when we're like, oh, you're surprised that so and so didn't make the roster. Well, who would you have picked instead? I would love to offer what I would have done very specifically to change the roster as I see it right now. And I don't know if you want the opportunity to do the same thing or just, let me do all the dirty work myself. But
this is real dirty work. Your hands are going to be kind of bloody after this one.
I would cut Claire Chastain and Dylan Freechild and replace them with Christian Boxley and Kirsten Johnson. And I'll tell you why. Number one, okay, the obvious caveat is I wasn't at the tryout. So whatever they did there, whatever they showed on and off the field, I have zero knowledge. But I was at nationals last year and at other club tournaments and at other tryouts, and I have seen the way that KJ and Box do everything, literally everything at a plus level. Like they're ranking 80 on like a baseball scouting scale, which is the top for those of you who don't read nerdy like baseball projections for people. But they do an 80 on pretty much every tool you can get. Maybe you lower Box to like a 70 on longer throwing, like plus 35 yards. And maybe you lower KJ's like absolute cutter defense down to like a 70 or a 75. She's so good on handlers. But in terms of being able to cover multiple types of people on defense, being able to adapt to different systems, being able to modulate their play based on the conditions, and also just in general, the way they attacked last club season and, in Box's case, also the club season before that. It seems like they were right at that hungry place in their lives that leads to gold medal performances. And I'm not saying that Claire and Dylan didn't have that. And Matty talked about in our interview getting player feedback on who players wanted to play with. And both Claire and Dylan are kind of tentpole figures on teams that they're on. They inspire other people. They're clear leaders, and that obviously plays a role. And as great of teammates and leaders as Box and KJ can be, I don't know if they're like the absolute person you're listening to in the huddle the way that Claire and Dylan can be. And so that may be a factor. But if we're talking about pure versatility to put together a roster, I would make that change personally.
Bold. I if you get some messages and phone calls from numbers you don't recognize, it's almost assuredly going to be Vin Bowie or Dylan Freechild giving you a call. I can't see the YouTube chat right now because of the technical issues I've had, but if Vin's not in there spamming rhino emojis, I don't know what he's doing. Maybe he's late to the show, but or Spikezilla probably putting the Twitter thread together right now. But yeah, I get where you're coming from. It's just so hard for me to even go that far without having been a tryout, especially knowing the way that having more insight into how Matty puts the team together. So even I don't think I have the boldness. Like I could construct what I think will be my 14, but I don't think I could pretend they're any more right than what we've arrived at. And not to say necessarily that is what you're doing, but certainly I do fully ascribe to if you're going to say someone got snubbed, you got to say who they're taking the place of, because it's just like when I'm coaching and players come to me and they're like, hey, can we work on this thing, X, Y, and Z? Hey, can we work on this new play, or can we work on this new offense, or can we work on this skill? I'm like, okay, yes. However, what's the thing we're going to work on less? Because that's the actual job, is managing the resources that you have. You only have 14 slots and 6 extended slots. So it's real easy to say who should be added when you don't have to do the chopping. So I appreciate that you came with the full understanding of what was necessary to have that conversation in a meaningful way. I'm going to shift back to the big one of my other big surprises, because I do want to get to this one, which is Charlie's darling call, MKBHD Marquez Brownlee. I think that Marquez, to me, has the skill set to make the team. But to me, him making it is a sign that the tryouts are really where the money is, because, like, you look at the resume, and maybe we've missed. I mean, I don't even think, maybe he's come close to all club once. He's played on one WC cycle and one beach cycle, I think, maybe 2 beach cycles. I don't know if you're counting the one that's upcoming. So he's like gone through the national team pipeline in a really fast way. But this is a player who, like, 2-3 seasons ago, I think was considered like purely a D-line handler guy. And he has ascended so quickly, but I'm still like, based on where we are now, maybe it's a little less surprising, but like, I was surprised when Charlie picked him out early on, just because I felt like he hadn't proven it enough in like these big national team settings. I mean, you look at this roster, and it's everybody's got all clubs, sometimes handfuls of them, sometimes almost 10 all clubs. You're talking player of the year, you're talking A1s on their team, and Marquez has like only started to scratch the surface of that part of his career. So I was very surprised that he ended up making this 14, just because of the profile isn't quite the same as the other players, but I think he's in the position to be that person who this reframes the conversation around his career and his contributions, because you always get players like that. Once upon a time, that was Chris Kotcher. Chris Kotcher was like often considered kind of the afterthought of the next generation. And now he's going to end his career as one of the best players to ever play. And that started, I think, with him making the World Games teams, which was a big surprise to a lot of people when he did it. So Marquez could be on that same track now. And it's very interesting to hear how these conversations are reframed. In some ways, a lot of those similarities are shared by Michael Ing, who I know some people were hot on coming into this process. But by the end of the trial process, I was pretty much on there, and he was my last cut on the mail matching side. And I kind of regretted it basically as soon as I did it. So I have him a little lower on my surprise meter. But I mean, incredible group of 14. It's just there are not a lot of combinations, even of players beyond the 20, that you can't imagine being on the roster. Even of this group, it's hard to find players who it's like, wow, if they had been here, I would think like you're crazy for putting them on. By the time you got to that 34, I mean, the pickings are of the highest quality cuts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I completely agree. I was also taken by surprise by Brownlee, not in terms of the type of player that gets the call, since he is so well rounded. But yeah, I also thought, wow, I didn't realize he had ascended to that high level. Okay, but surprises or no surprises, and there are plenty of players on here not to be surprised about, and all 14, all 20 of them to celebrate as being incredible players. How do you think this roster stacks up, like in terms of gold medal favorite potential, to the 2022 team, which, hit a little snag?
Interesting question. I think that the 22 team was bigger favorites coming in than I think this roster will be. I think this roster is a little bit older, and you're missing some players who I think are considered like at the precipice of the division. A part of that is because in the time that's passed, you've seen some of those players are actually not from the U.S. You're filling out more of the top 10 with Lev Kovalchuk and Cardenis's and Don Desmarais than you were, I think, in 2022. So already you're operating at a disadvantage. But then you add in that I think that this group is going to be a little bit older overall. They do have a couple of young players, but they're a little less in the prime of their careers, perhaps. So I think I would put this group a little bit lower. However, I think the counterpoint is still that I'm maintaining that the super balanced field, the high level parity, is advantage USA. And I don't know that we felt quite that way about the last group, where it felt a little more like there were 3 or 4 countries that were clearly in gold medal contention, and then 3 or 4 countries that had a longer shot. And I think that is probably more disadvantageous to the US than having to play tough game in and game out, but your opposition is doing the same thing. So that's kind of my thought. What are your outstanding questions about this team moving forward now that we actually have the set in front of us?
I wonder who's going to get the rock in crunch time. Every offensive possession has to start with the first pass. And this is a little bit, is tautological the right word, but that pass has to be a completion or the possession's not going to go anywhere. And who's getting it? Is it Dylan? Is it Finney? Is it Anna Thompson? Is it Claire Chastain? Is it Kocher? Is it Marquez? I mean, who is going to make sure when the U.S. needs to put the disc in for a break to, get a 1 break advantage in a tight game, or when the U.S. has a must hold, it's 10-10. I don't know if it's going to be games to 13, but it feels short. And if you're tied at 10-10, which happened to the U.S. at times last year, who do you trust to make sure that clean possession gets started the right way when you have you get a big target on your back, so you're going to get very hungry defenses. They're probably going to be taking chances to try to knock the champs out. So yeah, who is going to emerge as that unflappable on disc leader? It could have been Jimmy Mickle in the past. It could have been Anna Nazarov a couple cycles ago. Who is it now?
All right. I'm really looking forward to getting some of these questions answered. And it was great to have Matty on. And we're going to transition now towards College Ultimate. And that's also going to transition us to our trivia question of the week. All right, Edward. So you're on the hot seat this week. And this one actually was inspired by a conversation that started in the Discord. How many times since 2014, so the 2015 season and on, how many times has there been more than 2 D1 teams that were the auto bid teams that fell outside the top 20. And that's men's and women's not combined. So you actually have like you have double the number of potential seasons here to work with. So how many times have we seen two in any division, more than two teams outside the top 20? So we're thinking auto bid teams that are well below the cutoff for being in that top 20. How many times do you think we've seen that in Division 1?
Are we using the 2020 shortened season or the 2021 fall will give each region 2 bid season?
No. Okay. Not using those.
1, 2, 3.
Good question.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that gives us 8 seasons to work with. I am betting that it is an average of between 4 and 5 every year combined in the D1 divisions. So using that logic, because I think there's a few teams every year, I'm going to go a little under. 38 is my answer.
Okay. All right. And how many times do you think that has exceeded 2? Like, do you think that we've had 3 or more such teams in the field? This year, right now, the women's division has 3, with UPenn at 22. This is projected on Frisbee rankings. UPenn at 22, Cornell at 30, and Georgia at 35. How many times do you think we've had more than 3 in a given division? Or 3 or more, excuse me, in a given division?
In a given division, so separate between separate between men's and women's divisions?
Men's and women's, yes. Think about that for...
I think it has happened 4 times in the last 8 years.
All right, I'll let the chat get it popping in there and see what's circulating, and take a second to talk about our friends over at Breakmark. It is the 20th anniversary of Breakmark, and they're celebrating by doing giveaways on Instagram every Friday. And this week, they're giving away their new sling bags, so you can have something to keep some stuff in while you're at the tournament. Look good while you're doing it, to some of the lucky winners. And you know what? Because we're cool like that, we've got a special code for you that will double your entries when you enter to win. So you have more chances to win when you use this code. This week's code, we're going to make WG25. So WG25, go ahead and pop that in when you do your entry, and that'll get you double the entries. That's at Breakmark on Instagram. And Breakmark is the official jersey provider of the Western Ultimate League. We appreciate their help with the show. Your answer, Edward. As far as I can tell, this has only happened once. So we are on track for some potential history here. It's only happened once since 2014, and I believe that's in the 2019 season, where in the women's division, Georgia finished 26th, Northwestern finished 29th, and Columbia headed up the Metro East at 46. So this is uncommon for teams to finish outside the top 20. We may have kind of a low tide year, so to speak, in the general women's division, like nationally, as the West Coast has stacked up all these bids. Now, we'll be right back after this break to talk more about Northwest Challenge. That's coming up, and we've got to preview one of the biggest and best tournament fields that you will find in the women's division this year. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment with more Deep Pool.
White with a big backhand down the field for Stanford, floating out into the space. Big bid in the end zone, and what a grab.
You were mine, and I was yours.
Over to Ma.
We were fine.
Unleashes the backhand.
Behind closed doors.
And it's a perfect throw.
Space of time. Change it all. And now we find vacant halls where those pictures used to be. Now
Huge
it's shadow
layout.
walking black.
Jesse Schoffer, though.
Yes.
And every time I walk
Field
across,
drops into Olivia Bartra.
it's a reminder of a past. Like I don't give a damn about it.
Great block by Naomi Morcillic.
But you know that's not true.
You can bet Donaldson's going to jack that one.
And I wish that you could change your mind.
Welcome back to Deep Look. Edward Stevens joining me, Keith Rayner, for the back half of the show. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, we dropped our sideline talk with Dina Elamelek. And if you want to ask me my biggest surprise about the World Games process, it's still that Dina Elamelek didn't make the final 34. But you can have a chance to hear from Dina and all the stuff that she's accomplished in her career. She's had a really interesting path to the elite level of the game. You can hear her on Sideline Talk. And we also have our Throw of the Year bracket in the throes, I guess, of the Throw of the Year bracket. I believe we're into round 2 of our Throw of the Year bracket, or maybe in the last minutes of round 1. So you might have a last chance to come in and get your votes in for the Throw of the Year. Any play stand out to you, Edward?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of them stand out. I think one of the ones that everybody is looking at with good reason is a throw that Calvin Brown from Cal Poly Slow threw at last year's College Nationals, where he just dials up a massive backhand from the righty forehand side of the field and bends it completely out of bounds on the backhand side of the field, and it curves just in by the sideline for Alex Nelson to make an incredibly comfortable catch. But my secret sleeper pick for the throw I would like for it to meet in like male matching bracket final side is Masahi Korono from Wook. Bends down and throws the prettiest sit out in front forehand beyond a very good Team Australia defense for his receiver. And I don't know, in terms of like pure aesthetics, that might be the one closest to my heart.
All right, so go ahead and get your votes in. Decide if you want to go with Edward. I'm a big fan of the Jack Williams Scuba. That's probably one of my leaders in the clubhouse. But you can't go wrong with one of the Canadian picks from Britta Santos or Anushka Beaudry, where they're connecting with one another. I think I would, between the two of them, I would take the BDS throw. But you can pick your own flavor there. So we are going to get into the Northwest Challenge, but before we do, we got to talk about our friends over at Disc Northwest. It's time to get ready for Disc Northwest's 35th annual Sunbreak Tournament this July 4th weekend. And this year, they're bringing the action to Bellingham, Washington, which is known for its beautiful fields and incredible views. You can camp right at the field site so you can soak up the summer vibes all day and all night. The Saturday night party is an ultimate tradition like no other, with food trucks, music, dancing, and more. The theme this year is Family Game Night. Edward and I, as well as Charlie, have all given out some of our game night ideas for your theme. Edward, I'm curious this week, I want to know, what's something you have to bring with you to your party camping tournament? What's something that's got to come with you?
Oh, I mean, you have to bring, this is going to be such a dorky dad answer, but I'm a dad. I want like multiple lanterns and flashlights.
Does that out?
Like make a well-lit scenario.
I know that I may outdork you on this one. I gotta have the bucket hat. I gotta have my bucket hat. I need to get the sun out when I'm chilling and relaxing. Gotta have the bucket hat to get the sun out of my face. It's great tournament attire. And make sure to bring your game night stuff, because there'll be game nights in the board game tent. Competition at the tournament's going to range from elite club to league level. They'll have reunion teams from college teams as well. Celebrate the beauty of the ultimate community with people connected by their passion for the game. Sign up at Disc Northwest. That's discnw.org. The bid window is open now. Spots are limited. Don't miss one of the world's most celebrated tournaments, Sunbreak. All right. So from Sunbreak up in the Northwest, we travel a short distance over to the Northwest Challenge. We have the pools for this tournament, top level women's division competition. Most of the heavy hitters from the division are there. You got your championship favorite right now, UBC. You also got Carleton, Oregon, and Colorado as the other top 4 seeds, plus your reigning champion UNC at 5th, and arguably preseason favorite Vermont all the way at 8th seed. So we've got a pretty stacked field here, Edward. What are your first impressions when you see these 16?
I mean, the field of teams that could conceivably make semis at this tournament, like semis at Northwest Challenge, not necessarily semis at Nationals, goes at least down to 13 with UVic and possibly even down to 14 with Western Washington. This is, I think, the best tournament field we'll see in either of women's Smoky Mountain Invite on the men's side, but I don't think it gets any better than this. This is the most excited I've been for a regular season tournament in all my years of covering Ultimate.
You can see from our top 25 power rankings, all the teams in the field. That is all but 2 teams, I believe, and basically all but one of the top 11. So you really have carved out the top end of the division for this one. So I think you're right. I mean, you got a lot of teams with something to prove, a lot to learn about them. How real is Slow at 9. They're one of the breakout teams of the year. Look at that. You got that Southwest stack right there in the top 10. Which one of those teams will emerge as the favorite? One in the Southwest. Can anybody challenge UBC's supremacy in the number 1 spot? The only thing we're missing is number 2 Tufts, I'd say. That's probably the one thing you wish you had, but we're certainly, we're going to see them at ECI as well. Probably less of a proving ground for them than what we're going to get at this tournament. Can Colorado and Oregon, are we going to get another showdown between those two? They've played classics so far this year. Are we going to get a rebound from UNC and Vermont? Stanford's already made their rebound move. Can they continue in that direction? Is this Michigan team that got shut out at Queen City Tune-Up despite playing super well because of the weird format due to the weather? Are they going to prove to be like a top 10 team, a maybe semis quality team? So many questions to ask about this tournament because you're right. The field is really deep. What team are you most interested to see at Northwest Challenge, Edward?
All right, I'm going to give you 2 answers because that's just how I feel, and I want to be real with you, Keith. I never want to leave something on the table. So, number 1, I'm most interested in UBC Thunderbirds. From the get-go this year, they are playing tough as nails defense with players like Jamie Young and Long. I've said this before, and I'm cooking up actually an analysis article, but I think they have the best offense in the division this year. It is cutter driven, and I haven't seen anyone be able to stop it or slow them down very much. So I'm curious to see if they can keep up that high level now that there's some tape out on them. The other team that I am really interested to see is Vermont. They were our preseason number 1 out to, and I want to see how they bounce back. They're going to have a lot of chances against high-level teams to prove the way we felt about them heading into the season. And yeah, can they do it? What do you got, Ruckus?
That is certainly the top team I want to see. I want to see what Vermont's going to get. And taking a look at our streaming schedule, we're going to get Vermont twice on the stream. We'll get a great matchup between them and UC San Diego to kick off the day. And to me, the game of Saturday, UBC versus Vermont. I mean, I think you could have made a pretty compelling argument between these two teams preseason as number 1 and number 2. We'll get to see them face off, which is a real treat for the fans of the game, because I think we could be in for a great show. They're the team that I have the most questions about. I think Slow's another one, but I think if I had to pick, I got to pick the other East team, UNC. They're less than stellar performance at Queen City Tune-Up. Kind of ran out. Now there was windy and they were missing some people, so maybe they will bounce back. I think that's definitely possible. Don't get to see them on our Saturday live streams, but something tells me we're probably going to get them on Sunday. But overall, how will they perform? Are they still a title contender, or do we need to be a little bit worried about Pleiades? We do have Pleiades. We have them against Colorado, excuse me, which is a great tester game for them. But something tells me we will see them on the Sunday schedule as well. Any final thoughts, Edward?
Yeah, I mean, you said UBC versus Vermont was clearly the game of the day. Keith, I look at this schedule and I see 8 games of the day. Like, how on earth are you doing anything Saturday if you're an Ultimate than just watch along? If you're a subscriber, jump in on the Discord. We're going to have our reporter Bridget Meisner there in person. She'll be giving updates for any games that aren't on the stream and answering questions in there. It's going to be an incredible weekend.
Absolutely. And definitely a great time to subscribe. You'll get a chance to lock in your pricing before pricing increases later in the year. So if you have a subscription, your price will not change. Chance to get in and secure the best price available while you got the chance. So Edward, time to move to our picks. I don't have our subscriber picks. I'll have those coming up shortly. And the subscribers have some work to do to catch up to Charlie and I. But although Charlie's in a strong position. So if you want to give him lob him a couple of your lumps of coal, I wouldn't be mad. We got to pick our champion, our finalist, and the other 2 semifinals teams. Where do you want to start, Edward?
Let's start with the 2 finalists. I think we are going to see UBC and Carleton in the finals of this tournament. And my other semifinalists are going to be Oregon. And I think we're going to get a bit of a surprise for the last semifinalist. I believe in what they're cooking at UC San Diego right now. And they've had some massive Northwest Challenge performances in the past. I think back to the Dina Elimelech years. So give me UCSD to carry on that legacy a little farther.
I love it. I've been hyped on this UCSD team. I think that they've got some real talent. I don't know if I can go this bold in a tournament this strong that they're going to reach semis. So I think I'm going to have as my 4 semifinalists. I got to ride with Fugue. They're a team I'm pretty brought in on. But man, I definitely got to have UBC in the mix as well. But that leaves me. There's 3 other teams I want to pick, and I'm not exactly being original here with the top 5, but I got to leave somebody out, and I think that's going to be UNC. I think I'm going to take Vermont and Colorado as my other 2 teams, and I guess I'm leaving Carleton out too. Dang, how do I not have space for Carleton? They're good. They're really. I was kind of on board with your UBC Carleton final, and now I'm like not even getting them in the semis. This is the 4 I like right now. This is the 4 I want to go with. Who do you got winning this thing? You have UBC and Carleton in the final.
I think, unlike any other team in the division right now, I think UBC actually have defenders who can handle Naomi Fina and Mia Beeman-Weber and Chagall Gelfand and can limit them a little bit. And yeah, I'm going UBC. I think they look like the best team no coincidence that they're number one in the power rankings, number one seed at the tournament. I gotta jump on that train.
I think you're jumping on that train and finding a seat, and it'll be right next to me, my friend. I think I also have a ticket on the UBC Express, which is headed straight towards nationals. Are they going to really run the table, go undefeated, win 3 major tournaments against top flight competition, and going to nationals is like the very clear favorite? How do we get here with this crop? I mean, the field is so strong, but I think I'm in the same place. I'm gonna take UBC, and I'm gonna have them beating Colorado. I think we get a high tide weekend for Colorado. It's spring break over here on the East Coast, so high tide's going on, so we can get a little bit of that out on the West Coast. I love the talent on this team. I love the athleticism when you're talking about Khalil Phillips, Faye Burdick, Fiona Cashin. They've got strong handlers, Abby Gillak, Emma Williamson, Simone Parati. I think that this is a team that has a lot of different tools and can really pick up a lot of steam. So I can see them making a hard push to the final. They've had some hard knocks this year, so I think it's about time that they come out on the right side of those. So I've got UBC over Colorado, and Edward has UBC over Carleton. I'm sure Charlie will be pretty pleased with that setup when he returns and sees how his scoring is. But I hope he's not, because I need to catch up on some points. So follow along with our Northwest Challenge coverage. Make sure you subscribe to watch the video and be a part of the Discord conversation. You also can be a part of the Discord to ask your mailbag question. Got our mailbag question of the week here for you, Edward. Why is there so much talk of the old male matching players on the World Games team when there seem to be more older Team USA women matching players? Is it a factor, or is it a factor of more talk of male matching players just generally? Is it that the women matching players are peaking later in their age curve? Are there more perceived younger male matching player candidates to make the team than women matching player? What do you think, Edward? That comes in from Autumn Jack.
I mean, yeah, I think there's actually a pretty simple explanation for this, which is that the oldest women matching players are Carolyn Finney and Kayla Helton. I looked this up before the show on LTRZR. I think they're both 37, and they're older than Grant Lindsley, who's 35. They're older than Dylan Freechild and Claire Chastain and Chris Kocher, who are, I think, all 33 or 32. But there is no controversy about Kayla Helton and Carolyn Finney making this team. We saw what they did for Fury and Flipside over the last couple of club seasons. We read the reports that Bjorn Shea wrote about tryouts, that they essentially looked great. And yeah, nobody is, question the roster. By and large, most of them aren't like, boy, I wonder how Kayla and Finney made this team. No, I mean, they're like basically completely locks. I mean, we all pretty much had them as locks beforehand. So yeah, it's if people weren't expecting them to make the team, they would be like, I wonder why there are so many old players on the female matching side too. But I don't think we see that in the way we see with people are wondering whether Dylan or Grant Lindsley were really supposed to make it over Christian Boxley and Brett Hulsmeyer. So I think that's my take on it. Do you have the same take or a different line of thought?
I mostly have the same take. I mean, I think that when you look at our top players list, these are the players that are at the top, and I think we've grown accustomed to seeing those names there, and they've been able to hold those positions for a long time. Now, I do think Autumn Jack mentioned that there are just more people who are following along with the men's division in our Discord and in the Ultimate sphere in general, and we know that Ultimate is more populated by male matching players than women matching players. And so I think that those scales also impact this, not only from a conversation standpoint, like who are people talking about, who are people already fans of and attached to, but also in how it informs the development of players in the respective divisions. when you have a bigger pool of male matching players to compete for spots, I think you're going to have it'd be harder for you to expect those top level players to stay up there as they get older. There's just more people competing for their spots than there are in the women matching side. And yeah, in this pool, they cut down evenly. But when you look at the bigger picture, there are just more male matching players. And so to me, that sense of scale also impacts how players develop throughout the kind of pipeline, the bell curve of the elite level of the division. So I think that is another factor that lends credence to some of the stuff that Autumn Jack was pointing to. But mostly, yeah, I think that the top level women matching players, we knew who a lot of them were coming into this. So I think that's the case too. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing what those players can do as part of the World Games team. Congratulations to all those selected to the World Games team. Got an incredible group of athletes. A lot of players, as you heard Matty say, that deserved it, that were good enough that couldn't make it because there's just not enough slots. Also, shout out to the Ng brothers. We didn't even mention that there's brothers on the team, siblings. That does not happen very often. So that should be a cool experience and little micro story among many to watch. Make sure if you like the episode, if you enjoy having Matty on, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you want to get more. We really could use the support. So hit the thumbs up or else you're not going to get put on the O or the D line that you want. You'll be on the other one. And that's not what you want. That's going to do it for this week's Deep Look. We'll be back with you next week, Tuesday at noon here on YouTube. More live coverage of all that's going on in Ultimate.
I'll never look you off, Keith. Full send. Full send.